Asteroid of fear.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Men of the House podcast. And today I'm going to be talking to Arnold Beekes, and he's joining me this morning from Romania. And so thank you for uh, taking your time to spend with me, given the time difference. And we're going to talk about the brain, mental health, and kind of hopefully start shifting the term mental health from something negative to something positive, just like we talk about physical fitness. I think of mental health as um, the same way you would consider your physical health, and that's, how well do you take care of it? What are you doing to exercise it and improve it? Because just like when you lift weights, you get stronger. And just like when you do mental exercises and work on that, your mind gets stronger. And as we know, our mind is the thing that trips us up the most. That thing between our ears can be distorted, cannot be accurate all the time. And we're here to hopefully help people overcome some of that. And, so we can get pointed in the right direction and be the people that we want to be our truest selves and deliver whatever our passion is and our calling out into the world. Because I assume it stems from we want to help people. And I think probably a lot like you, I'm a 48-year-old recovering people pleaser. Having never you know, been overly true to myself and my desires and my purpose. So I'm in a different space considering all that. And so I definitely love to talk to people who've had a similar journey and similar experiences and figure out what they did to turn it around. So, how are you doing this morning or afternoon where you're at?
Yeah,
Evening.
it's 5 p.m. here in Romania, so I already had a full day. Yeah, but I'm great, thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, let's start off. Give the audience a little bit of your backstory, where you grew up, kind of what you were into, and some of the qualities and experiences you had that shaped and kind of catalyzed what led you to here and kind of pursuing this passion.
Yeah, I'm from the Netherlands.
Okay.
I grew up in the Netherlands with my family. But I would say my upbringing, as for most people, is well, that's where the seed is planted for who you are, whether you want it or not, and how it impacts you. In my case, in hindsight, I would say that most people in my family would have some form of mental illness, but it was never diagnosed or analyzed like that because, I'm from 58, so I grew up in the 60s and 70s.
Mm-hmm.
That is when mental illness and mental health, all these things were, I would say, not discussed unless you were totally crazy or something like that.
Well,
Eh?
I don't think they were labeled. And, one of the other things I kind of want to point out was another part that interests me is that mental health is kind of this global thing that we're discussing. And so, kind of getting that perspective of how people from other countries, how they view mental health, and do they have more or less instances of kind of that mental health incidences and whatnot that we do here in the US, because it's just now starting to be talked about and discussed more openly.
Well, there is actually global research available. What the literally one of the main sources which I use is called the mental state of the world, and obviously their last report is about 2023 that covers the whole globe,
Right.
and the situation is, well, I'm inclined to say the same across all countries. So
Right.
it's not that it's worse in one country and much less in another. It is totally a global phenomenon,
Mm-hmm.
which has part to do, I think, with the way our society develops,
Mm-hmm.
um, but also part with that there is less of a stigma,
Okay.
and that it is, and because there are especially sports people who speak out about their problems and challenges, that makes it much, much easier for anyone who's like, hey, I also have that problem.
Right.
And that's why it's being talked about and whatever. But what I'm seeing, I think for the last 2 years, I'm working on this for a long time. This is a long process to come up with this new category called brain fitness. This is not something like 2 months and then you have it. And I'm inclined to say more than 20 years I've been working on this. But for the last 2 years, people are so interested in what I'm doing because they experience it either themselves or their children or their parents, that it's no longer like, oh, it's interesting what you talk about, but I really have no clue what it is, or I have no experience at all.
Right.
What you see the last 2 years is like, when I'm networking or talking with clients or prospects, whatever, it's like they immediately like, yeah, I know, I want to talk about this. And so and that is shifted, and that is because a lot of people speak out,
Yeah.
and um and
Yeah.
it's
Let's.
also becoming a phenomenon. It's like, what just comes to mind, that was something like, let's say, 30 years ago. It was, by the terminology of today, it was very clear that my father had a burnout,
Right.
and he had to stay at home for many months and whatever. But it was just like 100% a diagnosis of burnout, but it was never diagnosed like that. Yeah.
Right.
So, but well, he was diagnosed that he was not good, but it's like, yeah. So, it is, yeah, because I think part because of definitions, people interested in it. It's not a small thing. I think by terminology of now is that by far the majority of the global population has some form of mental illness or have had that experience.
Right.
I 9 years ago, I lived in Hungary, in Budapest, and I was working with people in their, well, like 18, 19, up to mid 30s. And when I talked about these things with this youth, all of them had experience about this. It's like either they had had burnout or stress themselves, or they knew the depression. The most shocking thing is all of them, and I'm not exaggerated, knew someone who had committed suicide.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So, um, and this was 9 years ago, so I could see things starting. Is like, wow, these young people, yes, in their teenagers in the 20s. That's when I went to school and university. I knew nobody with these kind of problems.
Right.
Yeah, and 9 years ago it started, and I was totally flabbergasted. And by now, well, I'm inclined to say it's almost everyone has some kind of experience, or again, I'm repeating myself, with their family members or their friends or whatever.
And did you find that, because this is something I think I've discussed with other people. I had an interview where before social media, one of the ladies said that it was interesting that we all were kind of living the same life, even though we didn't know it, like due to certain areas. Like it didn't matter whether it was your cleaning products, we all kind of had some of the same problems. But, when you were working with the youth, and kind of what I've come to discover through conversation and research and educating myself, listening to podcasts, is that it seemed like regardless of the background, whether somebody grew up less advantaged or in poverty, or even people who grew up with the silver spoon and had everything handed to them because maybe their parents were well off, that at some point, whether it be those teenage years or whatnot, they still develop the problems regardless if they had poor upbringing or great upbringing. And did you see kind of that same thing when you were working with young people?
Yes, it's got very, very little to do with well, of course, with your upbringing, but not with your social status. That is what you're
Right.
saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So
well, let's circle back to how you got here. Start us off from where you grew
yeah,
up, kind
so
of
I
what.
started with my upbringing, and where I said that, well, basically my father, my mother, I have a younger brother and a younger sister. They would all now be labeled with some form of mental illness. Huh?
Mhm.
The most challenging part was my father was a military officer, and he was at home even more severe than at work. Yeah?
Right.
So that had a huge impact on all of us. Yeah? While he had, I'm totally convinced, the best of intentions, but it worked out very, very, very bad. Yeah?
Yeah.
So um, that is my experience with dealing with myself and dealing with family members who are all not happy.
Hmm.
And all not healthy. And as I much later asked my mother, well, about our upbringing, whatever, this was just a few years before she died, and she said, "Yeah, Arnold, with you there were no problems, so we didn't pay much attention to you." Because my brother and my sister, those were much more troublesome. So that's where we focused our attention. And I thought, well, I didn't say it to her, but it's like, well, thank you very much. I'm also a child. Yeah, I'm also living in the house. But it's like, well, you're normal. Yeah, we don't
You
pay
were
attention.
maybe you were just less impacted at the time, but what I've come to realize, like I worked 6 years in a level one trauma center, and when I got laid off in 2020 after doing 12 years of healthcare, all the trauma kind of like the caboose that kept going when the train stopped, that because we weren't dealing with it because we were going from kind of job to job. And especially when you work in an emergency room, uh, oftentimes there's not enough time to process it. So it's like taking that book, closing it, and putting it on a shelf, putting it on a shelf. And then you get laid off, and all of a sudden you have a bookshelf full of books to go through. And it can be quite challenging to sift through all the emotions and begin to understand how it actually impacted you. But when you growing up, you kind of experienced that, but maybe you necessarily couldn't label it or voice it. But I know in a previous interview I was listening to, it seemed definitely to like you probably started off graduating and going into something not in this realm, possibly because being a people pleaser, wanting to make your parents happy, wanting to seem well adjusted. Did you find that to be the case? Because I know you didn't start necessarily here in this space where you're at, right?
No, totally not. I wouldn't label me at all as a people pleaser, but what I say is that, myself included, most people, they, with their upbringing, you start to live someone else's life.
Yeah.
Yeah. You are constantly meeting expectations of others. And if you go there to the extreme, it becomes people pleasing, but it is still meeting the expectations of other people, whether it is your parents, whether it's your teacher at school, whether it's your professor at university, or the teacher at some kind of vocational institute, or your boss, or even your husband or your wife. Is that we're constantly, what I'm saying is, you're living someone else's life. You're not living your own life because you're constantly trying to meet the expectation of these other people.
Well, and you get praise when you do so. And that was kind of my problem as a young
Yeah,
child
and
is
the opposite as well. You get punished if you don't. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, because it's like, oh, you made straight A's. Awesome. Or, so you should go to this kind of school, like you could be a doctor, you could be a lawyer. And at one time I was a pre-med major and, it really wasn't for me, but it is one of those things that, and that's why I say people pleasing is that you do well at something, even though it's not your dream, it's meeting the expectation of others. But then when you turn around and get positive reinforcement for meeting their expectations, it's not really doing you any good. It's actually doing you a disservice with your independence and finding what's truthful to you so you can feel fulfilled and
Yeah,
mentally healthy.
that is absolutely true. And that is what I experience as well. And most people are experiencing. And that is why it basically ruins your life because you're well, I was not even 1 second busy with who am I, what do I want to do, what are my strengths, what are my unique qualities, because number one, nobody ever asked me until I was the beginning of my 40s and I had a coach. But before that, nobody ever in my life had asked me those questions. So it's like, and I was meeting the expectations. So I was doing fine. I was doing fine at school. I was doing fine at university. I had a successful corporate career. So Arnold is fine
Yeah.
from the outside. Eh?
Mm-hmm. Man, so what was your first corporate career? What did you do in university and what was your corporate
Well,
career and what drove you that way?
well, I still don't. I mean, well, now it's because I don't want to, but I don't fit into a box. And when I was young, and when I gave it, I had no clue what to do. I didn't know it was like who I wanted to be or whatever. Yeah.
Hmm.
So as with most people, the choice you make is a negative choice, meaning, well, I didn't want to go in the army because that's what I saw with my father, and he didn't like it there as well. So I was like, okay, no army, no government. I don't like that. Okay, what's else? Oh, business sounds interesting. But
Hmm.
I had no clue. Yeah, and also in my family, not. Yeah, so it like, okay, I'm gonna do business, whatever it is. Well, and there was hardly any choice because my father said you have to go to university. I had no clue what the university was. Yeah?
Right.
So I ended up doing economics because I was like, oh, I economics is business, so that might be helpful. Huh?
Hmm.
Well, after a year, I had very bad grades because it's got nothing. Well, the economics what they were teaching was totally not in line with what you see in daily life. So that frustrated me. And the other part was like it looked like more of a study of statistics and mathematics than economics. So
Right.
that is when I stopped and I went into law. So I got a master's in law, which sounds very technical, but well, I cannot compare the legal system in US versus Netherlands, but the main thing is I see it just at least the law study in Netherlands is like a continuation of your high school. It's like
Yeah.
you get to know about a lot of different stuff, yeah, and different topics, and knowing how things work with the government and legislation and whatever. So that's why I say it's and in the Netherlands, when you're finished in law, whatever. So I have a master's in law, I graduated, but it's like you cannot have a legal profession. I could, if I wanted to become a lawyer, I would have I believe, a 4 year, well, training for that. If I wanted to become a judge, it would be 6 years. So it's
Right.
like, but that is after that. Yeah. So I never wanted to pursue that. So that was the thing. So I have a master in law, which by now nobody ever guesses. And I ended up working in let's say technology companies. Yeah,
Yeah.
my first job was I helped introduce in the Netherlands the system of barcoding
Okay.
in the retail branch. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yes. Now everybody knows there's a barcode on the product, whether you buy a Coke or milk or whatever, and it gets scanned or whatever. That is new, folks. That wasn't there before. So I helped introduce that into the Netherlands. That was my first job, and then I moved into a very very large American IT company where I well started in the marketing department, and well, I've been a European business manager. I've been temporarily general manager, so where I managed from 10 people to 6,000 people.
Wow.
So that has been my corporate work.
Now, did you find any, so like with me, I am a natural server giver, so healthcare was good for me in that regard. It was fulfilling slightly until you realize that you're kind of participating in a broken system that's probably not going to get fixed until they take everything that's capitalistic and greedy about it out of it. But, I'm starting to connect the dots of how many of those things I did led me here, how they benefited me. And, I did gain some fulfillment within, some of my interactions of whether it's helping to save a life or, just making people more comfortable on the worst days of their lives or their families' lives. Um, did you, within like the barcoding thing and then going into an IT company, what were some of the things you found fulfilling and also the opposite that kind of has helped you kind of get into this space or it gave you some learning that maybe you didn't realize at the time?
Well, I would say there are three things which I really love to do.
Mm-hmm.
That is learning, based upon what I learn, create something, and based upon what I create something is coach other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for me, it's a cycle. Yeah, it goes on and on. Yeah? In today's world, we would call it innovation. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I learn something, I create something, I coach other people. Yeah? That is what I love to do. So that is what I could do in those technology-driven environments. And yeah, again, I started working in the 80s, so it's
Yeah.
that is when all of this stuff was not available. Yeah, so it like everything was new
I
and
was
whatever.
born in the 70s, 76. And so, like, I can remember at like 10 years old when we got our first household microwave or something, maybe 8 or 10. But I remember being able to come home as a latchkey kid and I maybe had a babysitter for a while, but, I remember microwave French fries coming out and I was very picky eater. But, that introduction of technology was like, oh, now I can make my own snack without my parents having to concern that I'm going to burn down the house while I'm the only one there. Yeah, so it was interesting.
Yeah, so I'm even a couple of years before that. Yeah, so it's well, it's very interesting and it's cool and it's Yeah, it was helping companies and people and make things easier and faster and whatever. And then let me give something which is a tangible result, which people don't realize, but I think they should realize. In my first job in the barcoding system, um, imagine that in your local supermarket they got daily fresh products, yeah,
Mhm.
like vegetables, milk, ice, whatever, yeah, all of that stuff which you cannot stay there for 3 months.
Yeah.
It's daily fresh product. If your supermarket on the corner of your street would need to, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, if
Mhm.
they would have to order that, someone, the shopkeeper would say, okay, I need 10 crates of milk.
Mhm.
He would pick up the phone and call his headquarters. Then the headquarters would call with the headquarters of the milk company. And then the headquarters of the milk company would, in the end, well, call with the drivers and the farmers to collect the milk the next day. Yeah? So that process at least took 2 days
Yeah.
because it was all manuals, people phoning, people writing, people sending letters, whatever. But if in the meantime there would become a heat wave and you need a different product, well, you were too late because it's a 2 day process. So
Right.
I was involved in totally automating that process, which we now think is perfectly normal. But before it was like phone tolling, people writing down stuff, making mistakes. It's like, yeah, it should have been 66, but I wrote down six. Yes, it was like, yeah, and by automating that process, this is really exciting. Yeah.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah, it always feels good. I think even even some of my times when the job could be disheartening, I think just due to the nature of my personality and having had that people pleasing aspect of myself, I've always wanted to succeed. And so the little challenges is kind of what kept me going. Or, let's say you have a good team and you reach a certain level within a system, a corporate system, and going, man, my team crushes it against like all the other teams in the system. And that kind of keeps you going, even though there were a lot of times that there was no fulfillment within me, but I still kind of got maybe fake fulfillment because, you know, I was getting the praise for being at the top of my game.
Yeah, well, in the sense, I quickly became a marketing manager and had all kinds of managerial roles, whereas I ended up doing each year a different role. That was not my choice, but the management said, Arnold, we have a problem here. We need someone who knows a bit about sales and marketing and business and the operation. You're gonna do it. Well, okay. Yeah, yeah, and that happened in every year. So
Right.
um, the result of that is that I get a very, very broad knowledge about the business world.
Hmm.
But I realized is like in the end, a lot of the stuff is the same. Yeah, so it's whether you have a sales department or a marketing department or operation department, whatever. All the jargon and whatever is totally different. Yeah, so in the beginning, I had no clue what they were talking about. Yeah? But in the end, it's like all the same. And
It's
in
the
the end,
people.
it's all about people. It's
Yeah.
about how you deal with people. And I told you is that my responsibilities for as a people man became bigger and bigger and bigger. Is that if you treat people as people and not as cogs in the machine,
Right.
uh, you can become very successful and you can have great results. So my job was mostly about introducing something new, about change, whatever. Well, let me tell you, that's not what people like.
No, they hate it. But if
Yeah.
you have the relationship, we had a change coming, and I can remember in this meeting discussing this change, and one of my people was like, I would never do this. And the only reason I'm doing it is because you're asking me. And I wouldn't do it for anyone else, but it was because I built those relationships. It wasn't about the job, it's about the person and then everything they have going on outside of the 8 hours we spend together. And by learning about that and nurturing that, being understanding, that's how I was able to, when you're trying to introduce change management, um, it goes a long way if you can have those one-on-one conversations and your employees feel valued and that you listen to them.
Yes, well, coming back to my upbringing with my father being a military officer, I naturally developed the capacity to coach.
Right.
Coaching is the opposite of being an authoritarian. And that was not that I developed that cognitively, but that was like, I don't want to treat my people like my father treated me.
Right.
Yeah, so I was like, I'm going to do the opposite. Now it's called coaching leadership. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah,
I used to
but
always say people will do stuff if I tell them because I'm the boss, but that's not what I want, why I want them to do it. I want their motivation to be like, well, he needs a little extra from me today, or stay 30 minutes late, and I'm doing it because I want to for him, because I know if I had a problem, he would do the same for me, even as a leader. And so that was kind of the correlation I made when you were speaking about that.
yeah, well, it's again, it's like, well, it's called the golden rule: treat other people like you want to be treated yourself. Yeah.
Hmm.
And that is what I did all the time, and use people's strengths and uniqueness, and those are things which I'm still applying to this very day. So um, that coaching part is for me. Yeah, I followed the coach training, whatever, but that's extremely natural to me
Yeah.
because yeah. So and that is why I was successful because, well, all my colleagues, whatever, they're like, Arnold, you always succeed in change and doing this new stuff. And people are like, it's like, yeah, because I explain why. And I use people's strengths and I explain the stuff and whatever. And like, oh. So that is where I said, if you treat people and not as matter,
Yeah.
managing a business, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's not difficult.
It's less difficult. What about, so what kind of, let me adjust this real quick. What was so you have this kind of, you try on a few different hats, you're having success. And, one of the weird things is people often continue down a road of success if they're good at it. They kind of stick to their talents. They don't often quit things that their strengths lie in. But what was it, and at what point did you realize that maybe that was no longer fulfilling enough and that you wanted to kind of do something different? Because there's often a catalyst. I mean, it could be a death of a family member. For me, it was being laid off and losing certainty, going, well, you have a master's degree, you have all this experience, you're qualified, but see you later. So you realize that certainty was gone, and that's kind of what's propelled me to where I'm at. But at what point in your career was it that that was no longer enough for you, or you wanted to give more, do more? And what kind of made that happen? What was that transition like?
Well, that what you guys in America call a perfect storm, that was a decision made
Mm.
for me.
Right.
Uh, yes, I was also laid off. My father died. My I got divorced. I got no house. So that all happened in the same time frame.
Ooh,
Yeah? Yeah. So that is, and the reason I was laid off is because there was an acquisition. There was another company who took over our company,
that's what happened to me.
and they and I was even a general manager for a few months. So, but they had no clue what our business was or how it worked, and they didn't care. So it was like, well, we don't know what to do. We use like, here's some money, goodbye. So it's well, it gave me a thing is like, oh, oh, I can start my own business. Yeah, and I'm talking about 25 years ago. Yeah.
Hmm.
So now it is pretty normal, but then it got started, like being an entrepreneur, running your own business. Before that time, it was hardly spoken of, and of course, there were people who were running their own business, but
Yeah.
those were mom and pop shops or yeah, small things, but not like, hey, I'm gonna run a startup or whatever. That terminology wasn't there. Yeah? So
Yeah.
but that was when it just started, and I'm like, I want to start my own business.
Did
So
you suffer any depression or anything due to all these events? And was
yeah,
and how'd you get out
I
of
had
that to go, I need
a
to do my own
tendency for
thing?
huge headaches, yeah,
Hmm.
which I developed as a kid, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I still have. There's something clearly in my brain which makes me very vulnerable to that, yeah. Um, yes, I even during that period got something which they call suicide headache. Yeah? That's the worst form of headache. Yes, those are things which I experienced, and again, the suicide headache, but the headache it does. So it's yeah, but it's like it's a roller coaster, and you have to cope with it, and well, see the opportunity in it, and
How'd you get out of it?
well, what I still recommend to people is like focus on what you find interesting. Focus on your curiosity. Focus on positive things. Is like instead of like poor me or whatever. That would have been an easy choice and everybody would have understood it. But it's like I start this whole discovery, this whole exploration of like who am I, and I had very quickly some coaches, and they were talking about spirituality. I tell you, I couldn't even write the word. Yeah?
Right.
So we are talking implicitly a lot about emotions and suppressing emotions and expressing emotions, whatever. It's like that was a whole new world for me. Yeah? So which I find extremely fascinating. And I'm like, I was some kind of a hotshot in the business world. And then I realized like there's so many areas where I have no clue about.
Yeah.
Literally nothing, zero. Eh? And I thought I was 40, whatever, yeah. House, I had a Mercedes car and all this stuff. And I'm like, I know nothing about life. I know nothing about myself. I know nothing about all of these other areas of life. I know a bit about business.
Yeah.
I still don't understand other people. So, like, so for me, it was like a whole world opened up.
Yeah.
And that is where I focused my attention because I find that, again, coming back to that is when I realized is like I love these three things learning, creating, coaching. So for me, it was like, wow, there's so much to learn.
Yeah. And that's one of the things like, you know, I guess like unless you're an engineer and different things like that, you definitely need college. But there's this big debate nowadays with is college valuable or not? But I think going back, you know, because while we are 10 years apart or so, 8 years, there's this difference of, I think, education. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the discussion. I enjoyed learning, and I realized I love to learn. But completing that process, a bachelor's degree and then a graduate degree, you 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 learn how to learn. And so when you were talking about that, I was like, man, when you got that curiosity and you're like, I there's so much I don't know, and I love to learn. You have this incredible framework that gives you that baseline of like, now you know how to attack learning about what you're going to implement and how you're eventually going to help people in coaching.
Yes, and it was then that I realized, and while you're in it in a corporate world, you're just in a hamster wheel. Yeah, so it's like that self-reflection, reflection on your career, on who you are, maybe no time, no clue. Yeah?
Hmm.
So what I realized pretty quickly is that the reason why I was successful in that corporate world was what they now call employee engagement. Yeah, so talking with the people, asking their opinion,
Yeah.
asking their point of view, say what do they think need to be improved, and all of those things. That is what I did naturally. Well, why was it naturally? Because I had no clue. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, Arnold, you're responsible for services for a service engineer who are gonna repair big computer systems. I'm like, okay, I have no clue what these guys are doing. So what I ask is it, can I spend a day with you in the car and visit those clients so I have an idea what you're doing, what your job looks like?
Yeah.
That creates kind of friends for life because who of the bosses would do that? Nobody. Eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say he's like, oh, can I spend some time with you? And can you please explain me what you're doing? And yeah, we have a problem with this. I was like, well, how would you solve it? So that what again is like, well, I had the Dutch word which is betrokkenheid. So I decided to write a book about it because it's a bit crazy. It's like a guy who's got a law degree, and then I got all these different jobs, and by beginning of my 30, I was responsible for more than $1 billion. So yeah, everybody's like, it's a bit weird. Yes, yeah, so it's like,
Yeah. Oh
yeah,
yeah.
and that is how I came to that betrokkenheid, which they call employee engagement. Is like that is really crucial. Huh? And
Hmm.
what is employee engagement? Is that you just value people and value their work and value their opinion.
I was a tier, we call it tier one leader for employee engagement actually. By It took a little bit because, my first 2 years of leadership were rough, and especially managing a largely female staff in the medical field, a lot of nurses and whatnot. I only had probably a handful, maybe 4 to 5 men over 5 years. And so, coming from my background of working in kitchens in the military and whatnot, I was very straightforward and I had to learn how to communicate differently. And kind of after a write up and learning that I needed to listen more, I was able to correct that. And within a couple of years, um, through the employee engagement scores, I actually was at the top. And, you get a little cup and you get to go to dinner and the CEO and all that jazz, which is less important. But, it was a great feeling to know that my employees knew that I cared about them, what was going on, that I was engaged with them, and that I truly wanted to see them succeed, even if their final destination was not with me and my team. My job is to help get you where you want to go. And as long as you're here and you serve the purpose while you're here and you show up and give it 100%, then I, as a leader, feel that it's my obligation to do the same and go out of the way to help you so you can achieve your goals. And I think that reciprocity, you know, comes back in the form of those positive comments as it relates to engagement.
Yes, but in the end, it's like I'm coming back to that golden rule. Is like if you want people to be interested in you, you have to be interested in other people. And so it's like yeah, and that comes very natural to me, and getting to understand the things. So all the change and all the stuff, it's well, I wouldn't say effortless, but it looked like that. So
Right.
it's but it's a huge difference from everybody who just treats everybody else like a machine. Yeah,
Mm.
and that's where things go wrong, and that is still to this very day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Actually, probably, I would almost think it's worse, especially after the pandemic, because there were so many shortages, all these different models of, people had to work from home, and then all of a sudden, they want people back in the office, and, part of it goes to this whole productivity thing. But, you got to think about, hey, there's somebody who owns this office building, and now they're no longer making any money off of it. They're footing the bill for it. And so it's in their best interest to convince the people who rent from them and whatnot, hey, um, your employees should come back to the office because we're all kind of losing out. Whoever rents the space is wasting money because nobody's there. And then if it's empty, whoever owns the space is losing money. So then instead of evolving, it's kind of this forced, we want to force our will on other people and make these rules um maybe that don't make sense, and then that creates resentment, and then you have a lot more people saying, well, this is not aligned with me, and my life was maybe way much better working from home because I got to have more family time, or I was more productive, or I saved time on my commute and different things like that. And, people have more choice and they're going out there and carving their own path, maybe partially due to resentment. But that also, with the upper people, instead of learning, they're so short staffed, they need more cogs in the wheel, and they just want people to comply, um, and not necessarily go, well, what is going to be best for our company and the production and the product we serve, or the product we produce and the people we serve, as opposed to going, well, the happier people we have, the better our business is going to be, whether that looks from working in a cubicle, an office, or at home.
So glad you're tuned in. Did you know that this podcast, as well as my own, are part of a much larger world called the Podcast Connection Network? We have some pretty amazing shows hosted by even more amazing souls just waiting to be discovered. Curious? Head over to the link in the description below. You won't be disappointed. Curious? Head over to the link in the description below. You won't be disappointed.
Yeah, but the main thing in business, but it's also in education, it's
Hmm.
also in government, or whatever. It's about control. Eh? And it's easier to control people if you see them every day. Eh? And because most people, they don't, well, no, let me put, most leaders don't trust people. So they assume that while you're at home, you're watching videos and you're playing with your kids, and you're not working for me, which means I pay you 100%, but you only work 60%. Yeah. So that is the way a lot, obviously not all of them, and there are very, very good leaders and managers out there. Let me phrase it like that.
Right.
But the majority of the people is like you gotta distrust people. Yeah. And it's like you gotta control them. And if you see them, you know they're working or sleeping. Yeah, so it's like I
You
can
gotta
still
you gotta focus on the
recall a story.
outcome.
Is like years ago, I was working in the European management team, and we were sitting, well, we had an office, and in office next, well, in the office next to me was the financial manager of the group. And the moment the big boss left home, 5 minutes later, we already could hear his coat hanger that he picks his coat and he would leave. But that is standard 5 minutes after the boss left. Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's hilarious. Yeah, so it like, yeah, that is everything like control and whatever. It's completely stupid, but that's the way it is.
Well, and in a corporate environment, it's like, I you have this, you have your VPs, your directors, they come to the managers meeting and they're like, "Hey, we want this outcome." Um, that's all they want is the outcome. It doesn't matter. They're not concerned with what you have to do to get it, whether it means overtime, whether it means this, that, or the other. And so when you talk about that control factor of going like, well, I'm paying you for 8 hours. I want you to be here because if I'm paying you for 8 hours, what if 3 hours at home are spent doing stuff maybe that fill your cup, as opposed to, look, I'm going to pay you for 8 hours and all I want is this outcome. I'm less concerned with, hey, how you get the outcome as long as the job gets done. Hey, this is what I need done today. And if you can get that done today, I'm going to concern myself less with how you do it, you know, and kind of give people a little bit more freedom and autonomy. And I think it works for some people. Some people, you give them too much freedom and autonomy and they're going to, quote unquote, piss it away doing dumb stuff. But you'll figure that out. And those aren't the people you want on your team. But then there's other people with a little bit of freedom and autonomy who will actually produce greater results because you trust them.
Yes, but that is in our society, we somehow are dominated by those bosses who have a controlling mindset,
Hmm.
and these few people who are the exception, who are not honest and were always slacking
Yeah.
and whatever. But what they do is, instead of like there's 1 in 100 who's slacking, we assume all the 100 are slacking. Yeah. It's the same thing. Well, I don't know about the US, but here we have soccer very popular, whatever. It's like, if there's a handful of hooligans who make trouble, yeah, so maybe there are 20 of them in a stadium of 60,000.
Right.
Yeah. The next game, no spectators. Yeah. So the 59,000 people, whatever, are punished for just a small group of hooligans. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is what we see all the time is like, yeah, if one person is cheating, we assume everybody's cheating. Yeah. So it's like, we always focus on the negative and we always assume the worst. Whereas if you do the opposite, it's like, yeah, okay, there might be one or two, what do you call it, rotten apples. Yeah?
Yeah.
Uh, but that shouldn't mean that everybody's like that.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. How did you, so you do all this and you start looking around. How did you get into coaching and how did you decide to kind of focus in this area? Because, I'm going to want to get your opinion on why mental health is exploding and possibly the causes of it and how it tied into when you made this transition, how you decided to focus on some of these kind of matters.
Well, I was, I became a certified field hockey coach trainer when I was 17 years old.
Okay.
So next year, I'm a coach for 50 years.
Wow. Congrats.
Yeah. Um, and I decided, well, already after I got laid off and all the shit, all the other shit, I decided, well, no, I didn't. Well, I decided, but there's people in my environment say, Arnold, why don't you're so good in coaching, why don't you make a job out of it, and why don't you do a training? So the training was my thing, because I was like, yeah, I can help people with similar problems as I had, but if they come with totally different stuff, I don't know how to do that. So that's when I followed my formal life coach training. So that's how I got certified, whatever. But again, it's like coaching is who I am.
Yeah.
Coaching is not what I do. That's who I am. So, but still, yeah, in sports, I get the certificate, and field hockey. Well, the Netherlands is #1 in the world in that area. So, again, you had to be 18 to become admitted, but they make an exception for me when I was 17. And so, uh, I got my papers then. Yeah, oh yeah, and again, fast forward, I got bigger. I'm a certified life coach. Um, that is where I started working. But at the same time, what I now call, I help people to upgrade their brain.
Right.
Yeah? Because I realized that by learning all of these other life areas myself, like what is spirituality, what is emotions, how you deal with it, what is necessary for your health, what is needed for my physical health, what is the environment influence me, what are the people influence, all of these things. I studied like crazy. I'm for the past, I'm learning seven days a week. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just started, well, that has a go. I just started yesterday reading a science fiction book. I never read a science fiction book in my life,
Mhm.
because all of the books I've been reading was non-fiction, because I want to learn something.
Me too. I'm the same. I've never read a science fiction book.
Well, it's now an exception, because I want to do maybe something with it. But let's put it beyond. But it's like the main thing is like, I'm always learning and growing, and I'm realizing that I became another person.
Mhm.
And I became me, and I understand my uniqueness and my contribution, and that there was much more where I could contribute in life, who I be, how I deal with other people, whatever, than I had previously imagined. Yeah, so for me, it's like, you could call it, well, a rebirth. You can call it what the old Greeks say is die before you die. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's like, so up until, let's say, until I was 40, I was not living my own life. I was constantly living my other people's life, and I was really good at it. Yeah.
Mhm.
And now I started to live my own life, and it was so enriching, and so it like, it's a totally new world. Well, it was not all good, but well, there's a stupid thing in our society. You got to earn money. Oh
Yeah.
shit. Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so that is not an easy part, but the rest of the part is like, it's so interesting, and the way other people react to me. And I started incorporating that in my coaching with people. Yeah, and then I thought, hey, it's not only working for me, it's also working for my clients. Yeah, so that is how I by now developed this. I call it like in brain fitness. I have two things. I have a prevention part and optimization part. And the optimization part is like upgrading your brain, like you upgrade your operating system on your phone, on your PC, whatever.
Mhm.
We do that, well, every month or something like that. We find that normal and interesting. And I ask people, how many times have you upgraded your brain? And most people, the answer is zero.
Yeah.
Is the way your brain operates, it literally, I call it BOSS,
Mhm.
brain operating system. Yeah, so who's your boss?
I
Huh?
love that. I'll
And the
have to use
main
that.
boss of people is what I call fitting in. That fitting in is living someone else's life, constantly doing what other people expect you to do. And what I help people and enable people is to make that shift from fitting in to flying out. And
Mhm.
flying out means that you start to live your own life, and that you start to figure out, who am I? Who's Richard? Who's Arnold? What are my strengths? What do I want to do? Who do I want to be in the world? How do I want to contribute? Whatever. It's like, wow, yeah, that is so enriching, it's fulfilling, but it's also meaningful. It's also helping other people. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Because, by the way, you are and I am, you're an example to other people. Because when I shared this story, and I've shared it with hundreds of people, like when I say is like that move from fitting in to flying out, I see a lot of people with tears in their eyes, that people crying, whatever, because they realize that most of us, if not all of us, we're some kind of a prisoner of someone else's agenda. Yeah,
And programming from,
yeah, yeah. It's conditioning,
generations.
programming. It's all of that stuff, which I call is that you're functioning between quotes in a society with a straitjacket on.
Mm.
Yeah, I recently started asking because we just had the Olympics in France. Yeah, and I asked people to say how many of these excellent sports people all over the world, whatever, were wearing a straitjacket, and they
None?
look at me like, "Oh, what a stupid question." No, of course nobody is. So why are you wearing a straitjacket?
Programming. Pro
Absolutely, absolutely. So that is one of the main things. What I do is I I make people aware of the programming. Yeah? I've identified 31 different straitjackets.
Oh,
So
wow.
I make people aware of them. And in most cases, it's the awareness already created, like, I don't want that anymore.
No. I actually said that yesterday. I had a post and, I kind of had this certain feeling of, um, it's taken me a long time. At 48, I go, I've muted myself for so long for different reasons, and I just don't want to do it anymore. I want that straight jacket off of me, kind of muting who I am to fit in and be comfortable because, I'm quite different for many different reasons. But when you are definitely so different, um, your whole life growing up, you want to fit in. And then interestingly enough, the older I get, and I'm like, I don't want to be like everybody else. I want to be the unique version that I was created to be. Because I am unique. I am a little weird. I am a little different, but that's what makes me me and the best at being me, and nobody else can be me.
Excellent. Congratulations, Richard. That is what I help people to teach is that each individual in this world, and we're 8 billion plus, is unique. Yeah? And what the system does, it tries to make all these 8 billion people to behave in the same way as everybody else. Yeah?
Yeah.
So what we're driving is sameness. And that creates a problem because you and I are different, and each person in the world is different, but we are forcing them to be the same.
Well, it's kind of natural because if you think about, so you've worked for big corporations, as have I. I've worked on project management teams, and when other corporations come in and let's say combine forces or do an overtake, I was on a project management team that all of a sudden what you're doing is you're working to streamline across because hey, we just acquired this new market. And guess what? We get better purchasing power and all these things if we streamline all of our supplies across the board. We order from the same place, everybody's doing the same thing. And while that may be good for business and money saving strategies, I think it naturally bleeds into what they do when they try to organize and manage people. Organizing the business side is way different than organizing that side, but I think, and culture is important in corporations. It can be good, positive, toxic, but I think in a culture you want to have a good culture within your organization because that's kind of what keeps the vibes up, keeps the money coming, keeps people happy. But even in kind of defining a culture, you're still doing this shift of trying to fit people into a box or a category and kind of the same because theoretically that's what the culture is. If you have a good culture at a company, it's because everybody's on the same page and they're more alike. And so I think we get it confused. It is necessary for some things to group and make them the same and streamline them for process. But people are not processes. We're people, we're humans, we're different, we're unique. We all have our own gifts, our own talents to give to the world.
Totally agree, and that is that's where things go wrong. You were describing these merger and acquisitions thing, and then what you were telling is the narrative. What they use is like, yeah, by merging company A and B, it will be 1 + 1 is 3, and just like you said. By the way, if you there's been a lot of research, it never happens. It
No.
never happens. Yeah. So it's like it's not even 1 on 1 is 2. It's most likely 1 on 1 is 1.5. Is it like yes,
Maybe even point 0.5.
yeah, but that is because they misunderstand the culture. That's
Yeah,
why they misunderstand the people, and that is why all of these things, any organization, whether it's your large healthcare organization or an IT company or a supermarket, it's like it's just a building with some bricks and a name on it. Eh? It's nothing without the people.
you're correct.
Yeah? So if from one day did they go on strike, which you had with the port workers, whatever, it's like whole world falls apart. So the business, the company, the name, the brand, it's nothing. Yeah. All these guys, the marketing guys, start to tell you otherwise, but it's not true. It's nothing. It's like all the workers start to decide is on Wednesday. Well, we call it the Sunday. The business is not doing anything by itself. And
Right.
so it's like we tend to forget that. But it's also the high leaders or whatever. They're also not happy, and
No.
they're also
Well, because
I
you know how you
say
get to the top.
most
You
people.
you get to the top by coloring in the lines, conforming, and pissing the least amount of people off. And so, of course, the people at the top, that's how they got there, and they want to maintain that status. So then they try to push that down on everybody below them.
Yes, but it's well, it doesn't matter at which position. There's always a boss above you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And whether that boss is a shareholder, whether the boss is your commissioner or whatever name you get, is there's always a boss. Yeah, and I was a general manager for a while, and I had to report to the European boss in Switzerland, and it was exactly like you said a while ago. Like the guy was only interested in numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was so stupid. I was in the Netherlands, I was managing 2,000 people. Yeah, we're talking about hundreds of millions in revenue. Yeah? And he said, "Oh, Arnold, how many workstations did you?" I had each week a meeting with that guy.
Hmm.
And he said, "Arnold, how was your workstation? I see your workstation sales was less than projected last week." I said, "Yes, we were going to have a meeting with the client, but the client was sick. So it has been postponed for 2 weeks." Yeah, but now you miss your goal with the workstations. And what are you going to do? And what is your action plan? And what is your this and that? Dude, the guy was sick. Yeah.
That's being human and understanding is like, it's no different. Like, as a podcaster, there are things like interviews get scheduled months in advance and then life happens. And, like I had to cancel an interview yesterday because my wife had a a commitment she couldn't step away from to get my daughter from after school program. And I had to, and it just happened to conflict with it, and you email and apologize and say, but this happens, and, um, but I'm an understanding kind of person too. Obviously, as a tier one leader, is hey, you take care of your family because the sooner you get better and you heal or take care of what you need to, the more you're going to come back and do well for me because I gave you the grace and understanding of, hey, these things happen and one day it's going to happen to me. And I hope you would extend the same courtesy and respect to me because we realize that, you know, people forget, regardless of what it is, we're all on the same team. We all have the same goal, you know? And so we got to be flexible and especially flexible with each other. So I think it's interesting that, you know, yeah, maybe you missed a metric because somebody was sick, but that's the right thing to do. And my thing is doing the right thing never goes out of style. Even if you don't meet your goal, even if it costs you a few bucks, it's like you do the right thing and you do what's best for the patient. End of story. And if somebody's got something to say for it, I don't, even if it costs you a couple bucks, like you still can't argue if that's the right thing to do. But of course, there's a lot of people in upper management who would disagree with that.
Yeah, and until they
Till
come
it's
themselves
them.
in that position. Eh?
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
when 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 they lose their job, or when they get divorced, or it happens that one of their children becomes addicted, or whatever. Yeah, so it's all and until you get caught. Yeah, and yeah, and then people are starting to realize like, oh, yeah, yeah.
So tell us about
Usually,
brain.
well, that happened with me. That happened with you. Is like it's not the nice things. It's the ugly things which makes you put on different glasses and have a different perspective.
Yeah. So what is this brain fitness and kind of the components of brain fitness training? Because I know that's something you're into and like kind of we were talking about before, which, I wanted to say for the recorded piece is that, I would like for mental health to take on a connotation the same way we talk about physical health and not be so negative, but going like, hey, what is your kind of mental health routine or your brain fitness like is a sign of strength as opposed to a sign of weakness.
Yes, that well, I realized that once you are in a situation of serious mental illness, yeah, that can be a burnout, can be depression, can be well, any other serious things. The way that the system is organized, there are two ways to treat. One is to give you some medicine to numb you down, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is mostly talk therapy, dramas, and some other thing, the classes and things which you
Right.
have. Um, my sister went through that process. Although she is depressed since a teenager, it was only officially diagnosed a few years ago. So she went through that whole process, and it didn't work at all. Actually, it made things worse because they put her into that conveyor belt of like, and this is what you should be doing.
Here's where you
It
fit.
work out.
You fit
So
on this and let's
and
go like
and
everything
and that
else.
is why I went with her and talked with some of the leading people there and
Mhm.
whatever. And it appeared their knowledge is totally not up to date, and they're just running this as a business in the sense that we got to get our numbers, we get our utilization. Yeah, she just finished one class which she didn't like, and then they said, "Well, do it again." Well, I just finished it. No, you do it again. You learn something new. And so I confronted him. I said, "That's your utilization numbers. Got nothing to do with her." Huh? So that is when I came up with his name of brain fitness. That is when I realized the moment you're in that what is called mental health, but it is really mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
Huh? The moment you're in that process, you're screwed. So that is why I say is like body fitness, which started maybe 40, 30, 40 years ago, when people became aware, is like, hey, I need to exercise. I need to do something with my body. I need to keep my strength, my flexibility. Can be play swimming, can be playing tennis, can walk my dog, can play baseball, what you guys do, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's like I gotta keep my body active. Huh?
Yeah,
That is when I came with the name. Is like, what do we do for our brain? And that is why I came up with the name Brain Fitness. Is like, hey, brain fitness should at least be equally important as body fitness.
absolutely.
And that the focus is really on mental wellness, on mental health, as opposed to the other industry which calls themselves mental health, but is all focused on mental illness. Yeah?
Right.
The same as, and I hope I think I won't offend you, like we call it the healthcare system, but it's a sick care system.
Oh, when I tell people this for perspective, I didn't take hardly any medicine. Guess when I started taking medicine? When I started working for the healthcare system. And all of a sudden, you have insurance that's through your company. And when you work for a healthcare system, you're using their doctors, their services. And then, you're on a medicine. And then maybe you need another medicine. And oh, that, by the way, you need to come back every 6 to 8 weeks for a blood test or urine test so we can check the kidneys and this and that. And you get on this merry-go-round hamster wheel of and in the past 2 years, I've gone from 9 prescriptions to two. I'm on one blood pressure medication, and hopefully in 15 pounds, I can get rid of that and on a allergy medication. So it's like, yeah, it you become just as much as part of that system. And it was wild. And it's strange to go, you know, they're putting you in that, not in a positive way.
Yeah, but that is why it's a good name. It's called "You're a Cock in the Machine." You do like everybody else, and what I'm saying is, well, that's what happened to me with my perfect storm. Is like, imagine you're in a gym and there are all these treadmills on the line. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
suppose 10 treadmills, whatever, each treadmill there are men and women they're running. Huh? So what happened to me is someone put a stick in the treadmill and I fell off on the ground. Yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then I'm looking to the left and to the right. I'm like, this is stupid. Yeah. It's like,
Well, why am I going to do this again?
yeah, people are paying money to be on a treadmill, whereas if you put on your sneakers, you can run outside. You don't need to pay money or whatever it is, and
Yeah.
be in a sweaty, stinky environment. Yes, so it's like it's a, but the same is like in a business, in an NGO, in a foundation. It's all the same. It's like if you do the same like everybody else, you don't think you're stupid, huh?
Yeah.
So that is happening everywhere. And I'm coming back to what I mentioned about sameness. We push everybody to be the same, and that's why the education system is so dangerous, because we are focusing people on being the same as everybody else, and that is, in my opinion, one of the main causes of this mental illness. Hmm?
Oh. Hmm. I've been thinking about the education system a lot lately because we had this article yesterday. So I'm from Texas. It's a small town. There's a bigger town next to us. But there was this article yesterday, and it was talking about enrollment being down, in public school systems. And then there was this, what they look at, and they've been studying this for years, and whether it's the rural areas, whether it was after the pandemic, um, all kinds of things. But the one thing that was never discussed was that maybe the public education system is part of the problem. They never addressed their part. Like maybe we're not, maybe people don't want to send their kids to school because of what you're teaching, or the ideas that you're putting into their head, or the fact that you're trying to make them all the same as opposed to nurturing the individual students and their individual talents and their
Their uniqueness.
uniqueness. Yeah. And so it's like never once within that article was there any responsibility from the education system itself as to what they're doing to contribute to
Well, what
this.
they're doing is basically nothing because the education system is still the same like in the 1850s. You see, it's like
Yeah.
it's still
Only
about
now it's revolved around money in the States because you have to take these tests and their funding is based on tests. So then they teach only the test. And that's all they become concerned about, almost like a big corporation. It's about the
it's the
money.
numbers.
Yeah,
Yeah,
man.
and it's like it's about memorizing, and it's memorizing what we want you to memorize.
Right.
We, if a lot of the stuff we want to be later on appears to be not true, we don't care. Huh? Yeah, and so and it creates conformity and obedience. Huh?
Mm,
Yeah, towards authority and everything else. So that is why the education system is a crucial aspect of that. Yeah? Let me use a simple metaphor. Suppose you're going to buy a dog, a new pup, and you're
hmm
going to buy a Labrador, and you take it home. And from the moment the Labrador is in your home, you start to treat it like a cat
hmm,
because your previous animal was a cat. Yeah, so you give it cat food. You the way you put you put this sandbox where it can urinate and poop or whatever, and yeah, so everything you're treating that puppy as a cat.
yeah.
Now you look at me like Arnold, what a stupid example. Well, this is what we do with people all the time. Yeah, so we disrespect your uniqueness and we treat you, yeah, we treat all the Labradors like a cat. Yeah? And that means, I will tell you, within a few weeks, your dog will get sick.
Hmm,
Physically, mentally, maybe it becomes aggressive or it will eat your couch or whatever
hmm.
because it's not healthy. It's not the way your dog is supposed. Yeah, you're not going to walk with your dog because who's going to walk with your cat? Like that's not the way. That's what we do with people all the time.
I just realized, I graduated high school a year early and I tried to get out 2 years early, but didn't make that program. And it was very new in the 90s, the early 90s. People weren't doing this. Me and two other people, because I pursued it, and then two people followed, and we were the first three people, like at our school, to do this and graduate a year early by just going to summer school and skipping the senior year, taking college classes. But I just realized that I had to get out of that conformity because I didn't find it valuable. I felt like nothing I wasn't learning anything. I wasn't being offered anything, and I'm not trying to throw shade at any of the teachers that were there. I had some very good teachers, but for me, it was like had I stayed, it would have just been continuing to try to fit in. And I'm only realizing now that part of a, that piece of me that's rebellious was really just expressing my uniqueness by leaving high school a year early and not being like everybody else, even though everybody's like, you're going to miss your senior year. The senior year is the best. You're like the king. And, so some of these people, you know, they probably look back and go, man, those high school years, those were the best days of my life, and they haven't really evolved into anything new that's more fulfilling.
Yeah, but that is why I say is that the whole conditioning is for most people they continue living someone else's life until they die, huh? And that is why they never upgrade their brain. They're so used to the fitting in thing, yeah,
Hmm.
that continues throughout their life because that is the only thing they know. that is extremely unhealthy. That is why it's not only mentally not very healthy, mentally, emotionally, physically, but that's why everywhere addictions are exploding, because people look for all ways to distract from this life, because imagine it like that's why your Labrador puppy start to eat the couch, because it want to run outside and whatever, and but you're not allowing it. And so it needs to release its energy, so it's gonna release its energy in a negative way. And so
Hmm.
that is what we do with people all the time. And so that is why what I'm doing with my program is to help people to upgrade their brain to make that move from fitting in to flying out. And that has a huge, huge impact on their integral health, but also on their performance, on their relationship, whatever, because you're really more who you are. And
Yeah.
most people are nice and kind and friendly and good meaning people without them knowing it.
You feel aligned. I know the truer I am to myself, I feel aligned, and the more I step out of my alignment of something that's not me, I can feel it in the pit of my stomach. I know. I just know. And if I'm not being the person I want to be, if I'm not putting out the vibe of what I'm about because maybe I got angry at somebody or somebody triggered me, I have to get out of that because it feels terrible. It'll make you sick. But going back, kind of, what are some of these components that you use of for brain fitness training?
So I got 6 steps.
Mm-hmm.
Step one is to reveal, and we've been discussing this a lot. Is like reveal how you're made to conform to operate inside the cage. Hmm?
Mm-hmm.
Step two is recover. Recover from the fact that 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years you have been operating in a cage. That has an impact. So you need to recover. Step three is to reactivate not only your mental, but your emotional, your physical, your spiritual capabilities. Those are totally dormant or ignored for most people, so you need to reactivate. The next step is reset. Is like well, we both wear glasses, so it's easy. Like, yeah, it is like you look at the world from with orange glasses or dark green glasses, and you got to put on normal glasses.
Right.
Um, the next step is to relearn. It's like there's so much things in your life which you have to learn, but there's new skills, there's a new mindset, whatever, yeah, which you have to learn. And then based upon that, the last step, the sixth step, is to recreate. Is like,
Mhm.
hey, recreate how you want to be in the world, how you want to contribute, what you want to do to make life better for your family, for your community, for your city, maybe for your country, maybe for your world.
Yeah. Y- I I feel like that's the step I'm at, but one thing I like to ask everybody before we sign off is I like to ask, as a result of you discovering this, because you said it was kind of like in your 40s. I'm 48, so I feel, this happened to me when I was 44. And what's something that has been fulfilling and meaningful to you that you never would have thought about in your 30s and 40s when you were kind of experiencing the discomfort and or misery, that's been better than expected? You're like, man, had I never pursued this, had the faith, taken the leap to step outside of the box that the world tried to put me in, um, XYZ wouldn't happen. What's been one of these events that's been fulfilling for you?
I'm going to answer in two ways. The one way is that I really, really, really never anticipated that my life is looking so interesting and contributing whatever than it is now. I
Uh-huh.
had no clue. I had no clue. Yeah. So that is why I say it's die before you die. It's like I started a new life. Yeah.
Mhm.
But now I'm mostly myself at the steering wheel and not somebody else. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is really exciting. The one thing which makes my life beautiful is that I look for daily beauty in simple things. Like look at the leaves of a tree. I go for an early morning walk. I see a snail on the sidewalk. I start greeting people and then they start waving me back. Yeah. Or when I'm at the cashier in the supermarket, I don't speak Romanian, but I say thank you, and they're like, "Oh, you're welcome." So it like, but nobody talks to a cashier. Yeah, but yeah, so it like
I had
just
one
be.
talk to me the other day. It was so funny. I was doing the self checkout and we struck up a conversation. I told her about my podcast, but I had been like in this weird little funk. And when I stepped out of it and said, look, this is not me, it's not who I'm aligned with or who I am, it's not the vibe I want to carry, it's not the vibe I want to put out. And as soon as I did that, I went to like, I wanted a pastry. And the guy behind the counter struck up a conversation with me. It was great. And then I get to the self checkout, and the cashier who's monitoring the self checkout strikes up a conversation. And I walked away feeling me and energized and the truth of, you know, yeah, you want people to feel that because guess what? If she sees me again or he sees me again, he's going to remember that.
Absolutely, but it's like everybody wants to be seen.
Yeah,
Everybody wants to be heard. And especially blue collar workers or people with simple jobs or whatever is like say hello or whatever. Yeah.
the service.
Yeah. It's like I got this two elderly a couple who's running a vegetable stall on my room, and I kind of taught them it like good morning, yeah,
Yeah.
and he now says good morning, sir, and it's like even if he's on the phone, I hear him yelling out of his well, it looked like a very small barn or whatever. He's like good morning, sir, and it's like you see him start smiling or whatever. It's like nobody else sees them because they ignore him. It's just the guy who's selling vegetables. Yeah.
Right.
But when he sees me, he's all smiles. And so it like that is what I recommend to people. Is like we're constantly not present. We're constantly chasing a goal. Yeah. And like we gotta have this, we gotta change this, we gotta, yeah, and it's gotta be big, and it gotta be this. Look at the small things where you're kind to other people. Look at the beauty at nature. Look at even like appreciate the weather. Is like just a few days ago when I go out at 7 for my walk. It was very cold. It appeared to be 3 degrees Celsius. I don't know the Fahrenheit, but that is close to freezing. And I'm like,
Hmm.
whoa. This morning I went out, it was 15, which is like I could almost walk without a coat. And so it's like, and I'm, wow, that's interesting. That weather here, whatever. Yeah, it's like, and I'm like, oh, it's nice, warm now. Yeah, so it's like appreciate the small things.
You
Yeah.
slow down, and that's where the magic happens.
Yeah, and just be kind to other people. Most of the people who I meet early in the morning, they're grumpy because they have to go to school, they have to go to work, or whatever.
Yeah.
But I still say good morning. And now they start with it. Morning.
Yeah, and you know what? The more they do that, um, then hopefully it clicks for them, you know?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
then they can listen to a podcast like this conversation I had with you, and I had a couple other wonderful ones this week, and it can click for them, and they can start to understand that it's a choice, you know?
And you can make your life more interesting,
Enriching.
nice, kind, whatever. By just small step, it doesn't cost any money. It doesn't cost any effort. It just like you make your own life more interesting and the life of someone else. Yeah,
You
just
just
like the
have to
person.
want to. You just have to
Yeah,
want to. That's the hardest part.
yeah,
And
but
most people want to, but they think it's something that will arrive. They don't realize that they have
or the
to
other
work
person
on it.
got to start. But
Yeah.
it's like well, it really, well, maybe that's a good cut-off point. Is like Gandhi who said, "Be the change you want to see in the world."
Yep, exactly. Well, all right. It was awesome talking to you. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. And, this was very beneficial for me. It's been very thematic throughout my week and, something that I'm trying to practice and something that my listeners will appreciate because, we're all about making improvement here and having the best quality of life we can. And, that's how we can change the world. So I appreciate your time and I'll be in touch.
Thank you very much.
All right. You have a great day.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. Remember, go out and be the person that you want to meet.
Let go.